Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Digital Storytelling with ArcGIS Story Maps. So thought that, hey, if we're presenting on ArcGIS Story Maps and how to use them, it would be best practice if my presentation or this webinar presentation is in a story map format so that you can get a little bit of a feel for what that looks like. Although I'm sure that many of us have definitely come across a story map by now. I know that they're really popular with schools and a way to communicate either classroom content or assessment pieces from a student's perspective. So a little bit about myself. If we haven't met or if you're unfamiliar with who I am, my name's Jakeb Lovejoy. I'm a registered teacher in Queensland, but currently I'm also the Education Program Manager at Esri Australia, which is a full-time gig. So I haven't been in the classroom teaching my own classes for about a year and a half now. I missed COVID. I think that was perhaps a small blessing. If you ever need to reach out to me, I've included my email address there, education@esriaustralia.com.au. Feel free to. I'm absolutely more than happy to help. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn as well. If you're not familiar with it, we have our school's website as well, a great place to go for learning materials and professional development resources, as well as webinar recordings. So this webinar will also be put up as a recording following the live event. And if you wanted to, you can access today's story map, so this presentation via this URL, and that'll be at the end too, in case you want to circle back to that. Cool little story, I guess. This is at the summit of Mount Batur, an active volcano in Bali. I went there a couple of years ago and we climbed the mountain at 2 a.m. in the morning. That was the struggle in itself, getting up at 1:30 to climb the mountain. But at the top of the mountain, I remember seeing the magma or the lava in the cracks of the crater, and they actually cooked us bacon and eggs on the volcanic steam. So that was very cool. But let's jump into it. So story maps, what is it or what are they? I like to refer to it, they're like a PowerPoint, but better and way better at that. It allows us as authors or your students as authors to combine the use of text, maps, and other media, so think images, videos, audio, website embeds as well, into one immersive story. You can see on the right-hand side, we have an example of that too. So this is a map of Hurricane Katrina, which started off the coast of Cuba, and the different colors represent the different categories as it went up in category and then eventually dissipated inland. And I believe that the lines from memory talking about migration immediately following Hurricane Katrina. So where did people go from New Orleans, where they went throughout America? But you can see there that it's completely interactive. It's not a static map as you would have in a Word document. We as teachers, if we're marking our students' work, could engage with the maps that they've created, or if we're presenting content to our class, we can also engage with those maps too. You can do the same with survey results. You can put your survey results in here. You can actually embed a survey in your story map and get students to fill out surveys in there as well. So everything ArcGIS is able to be embedded into story maps too. Why should we use it? A couple of quick dot points off the run. It's interactive and it's engaging. Again, that PowerPoint, but way better. The fact that I can engage with my maps, it's not static, but flexible and dynamic. It's a huge plus for engaging our students in the classroom or engaging our end users, our audience. It's a great tool to teach subject content, which means that ultimately you don't have to include maps. If you are perhaps also teaching a history class, well, story maps really lends itself to history as well. You know, if you're teaching year 8 Shogunate Japan or year 7 ancient Egypt, these story maps can still be a really powerful tool to engage your students. to use and build, and we'll spend about 20 minutes building one today. You'll see that the process is very much a matter of following the bouncing ball, and it's easy to update as well. It's a matter of essentially clicking on that and hitting edit story, and I can add, delete, or edit sections as needed. Saves automatically as we are working on the cloud. So as you make changes to it, you don't need to worry about the internet connection at school suddenly dropping out. Your changes will still be saved, which is also a big plus for students as well, because we do know that sometimes students' computer literacy, even though they're meant to be the technological generation, can sometimes be found lacking. You can also use navigation tools in your story maps to move quickly to different sections of the story map. So you can see here, I've actually got my major headings, and if I wanted to, I could jump back up to the welcome section or jump between particular sections too, which is fairly useful if your story map starts getting quite extensive, something like a 3,000 word field report in year 12. That might be a really useful navigation tool to keep in mind, just so that they can quickly jump between different places and edit wherever they're at. But it also allows you as a teacher, when you're marking, to jump back and forth really easily. And we've kind of touched on this, but opportunity does exist for students to submit assessment tasks using story maps. Many of us are probably aware of a couple of teachers that are doing this. I won't share their names here, although I'm sure that many of us might know them. If you would like to maybe get in touch with one of them and you're not sure who they are, feel free to reach out to me and I can put you in touch. I just don't want to be sending a bunch of teachers the way of a poor teacher at once. But there are a couple of teachers getting their kids to submit via story maps. They have the option to submit via a Word document still, but they're moving into this space just because it allows them to engage with the geospatial, I guess, resources, maps and whatnot that their students have created. So let's have a look at some quick practical examples. In case you haven't come across that many story maps before, we'll have a quick look at some. I guess I've just cherry picked a couple that I've created not too long ago so that you can get a bit of a feel for what's actually achievable. So this is the 2010 and 11 Queensland floods. I'm not going to go too much into the content. You can see I've got my navigation pane, and I just start with basic text and images to unpack an idea. I've got a really basic map that's fully interactive, so I can click on this LGA. So I don't know if it's actually an LGA, but it's the Toowoomba and Lockyer Valley region up in southeast Queensland. I can expand the map and I can move around it. Again, text, images, graphs, a swipe map that shows what the Brisbane River looks like normally, and then the extent of the flooding after the floods. And then we've got satellite imagery that does the same thing. So these aren't maps, these are actually static images that I found online that shows what Brisbane looked like prior to and after the floods. So that's one example. Ancient Greece, I'll show you this one too, just because I really like the beginning of it once it loads in. But we've actually used, instead of a map, we've used the 3D scene viewer that you would have access to in your ArcGIS school subscription as well. And it does take a little bit of time to load up. I should have probably loaded all these up prior to, but you can see that I've added a layer that just really outlines the country's boundaries, Greece's boundaries. And as I scroll through, the scene gets closer and closer, and just unpacking information as we go. And I can still engage with the 3D scene too by clicking and dragging. And then we go through, we've got some swipe maps, we've got maps, and these are static, but I've essentially created a map and taken screenshots of the elevation of Greece from different angles, just so that students are getting a bit of an idea, and I've included some images to go along with that. And I guess this is another really good one. So another swipe map, I've just added a couple of ancient Greek city-states, so we can see Athens, Sparta, Corinth along the isthmus here. And if we know anything about ancient Greece, each of these city-states, they developed quite unique identities. And the discussion around this is, as we move this swipe map to the left, we can see that terrain and mountains have really influenced that development of quite unique identities. We can see how each city-state is separated by those mountain ranges or seas. So just really cool and easy tools. Here's a history example for you. So this one really has I mean, I've added geographical context to this one, but my geographical context is nothing more than a really basic map that I've put the four island names of the main islands of Japan there, just so my students understand what I'm teaching about, where I'm teaching in the world. But otherwise, there's nothing more in terms of maps related in here. Just a load of images that unpacks the social structure of Japan and compares it to maybe something like medieval Europe. And then here's a senior history one, the First Crusade. So again, text, and this was designed to essentially take my students about a week or 3 lessons long to get through. And I would set checkpoints throughout, but we can see that I've got my visual maps that I've created that shows the different Crusader parties and where they began, where they intersected at Constantinople, and then their path through the Middle East until their conquest of Jerusalem. And we essentially follow them along with source work and, sorry, I was going the wrong way, with source work, and then that map continues to follow their path at that local level. So there's a couple of examples for you. Thought I'd include them in there, and that's why I've also shared the URL for this story map at the top, and we'll return to that at the end if you want to have a closer look at them. Otherwise, they're available on our school's website as well. But now that we understand what's doable for us, let's actually have a look at building one and putting one together, because that's probably the main reason that we are here today. So if I jump over to I've just opened a separate tab to access my ArcGIS Story Maps, but if you weren't sure how to go about accessing Story Maps, you can actually access it from your ArcGIS Online. So we'll show you how to get there. I'll shut that while I'm at it. But once you've logged into ArcGIS Online, you can go up to this 9-digit widget, you click on it, and here are all the apps that are available to you. You just find Story Maps and it opens up in a new tab for you. And as you can see, I've got quite an extensive list of story maps. I love them too. I think they're a great way for communicating, but if we're wanting to build a new story, all we're doing is hitting new story up in the top corner. It gives us a couple of options. So if you had a particular template that you wanted to work with in mind already, you might choose one of these. I always like to start from scratch because I often jump between templates anyway, just to make sure that my story map stays appealing and engaging for my audience. Depending on the purpose of your story map, depends on whether you go with a bit of a chop and change approach. I know that if you're a student presenting your field report, then you might need to be a little bit more critical and straightforward with your story map presentation rather than jumping all over the place. There needs to be some kind of maybe uniformity to your approach. So once I've opened up a new story map, I always like to begin with the design button. So I click on that and you can see that it's given me a couple of options for my cover image, if you will. I personally love the left one because it will create I guess it expands this first page and allows me to add a really cool image in to my work. So for today's purpose, we're going to be looking at landscapes and their distinctive landform features. And yes, this might be a story map that I'm about to create. So I'm killing two birds with one stone. Evidently, I'll have to go in this afterwards and continue to edit and add to it. But I've created a bit of a Word document that I'm going to copy and paste some things through to. And this is a really good point as well for your students or yourself as well. I always encourage people to make sure you plan before you start story mapping, whether you put in a bunch of dot points here so that you know where you're going, or you've got them in a separate Word document. I mean, I would not normally go into this extent of planning for myself, but because I'm presenting a webinar today, I thought I'd go to a little bit of extra effort. If it's your students, however, this is probably a really important step. In fact, I would encourage them to build out something like their field report or their data report in a Word document anyway, because Word's going to pick up on your spelling, your grammar, your sentence structure issues, whereas story maps will pick up on spelling errors, but it's not going to pick up on sentence structure errors. So a really good practice for students to get into is to essentially write their reports into a Word document like they normally would, and then copy and paste the paragraphs across as they go. And that way, although our story map is saved to the cloud, you've also got that backup version on Word document too. So you've got two copies of a draft or of a report. There's no excuse if something happened to one of them. You've got a backup, which is something we often preach to kids as it is. So I've got my title there. I've said a little bit of a reminder for myself that I'm going to go to Unsplash for an image. So if you don't know about Unsplash, it's actually I mean, it doesn't matter maybe too much for you guys. I use it a lot because they're freely usable images, so I don't have to worry about copyright, as a lot of my things are getting published onto the school's website. But I can take anything from here without worrying about breaching copyright laws. So if I liked this image, I'm just going to hit the download button, and I'm going to return to my story map and add a cover image to here, and I'm going to drag this straight in, and it will hopefully load in just a second. You'll see that whilst we're waiting for it to load, there we go, the link button is not available for your cover image. Throughout the rest of the story map, I will be able to add images that I find from Google by right-clicking and copying their image URL. But for the cover image, you actually have to download your image. I'm gonna hit add, and it's just loading in the background there. And you can build out, if you wanted a subtitle, you can build that out. You can also build out extra details here, like so, which is an important practice for students to get into too. I'm quite happy with the image, kind of matches the topic that we're talking about, landscapes and their landform features, which we can see a little bit of both. So I'm going to keep on going. If I wasn't happy with the placement, hit the settings tool, and I can actually, once it loads again, drag this white dot in the middle around to pan that view up or down a little bit, and you can see what it looks like on the PC there as I do that. I'm going to hit save, and likewise, if I want to delete it or replace it with another image, the three dots will do that for me. But otherwise, let's jump into the meat of the story map. So this is where we can follow the bouncing ball essentially. So my first job will be, because I've done some preparation ahead of time, is I'm going to add my first heading in, different types of landscapes. So I'm copying that and I'm simply pasting it in. However, I've mentioned I want it to be a heading, so I can highlight that and change it to the type of text that I want to appear. And you can see you've got quite a large range here. If you want that navigation tool to come in play later on, you need to think about what are headings and what are subheadings. Headings will be added to the navigation tool, whereas subheadings won't be. So I'm going to go ahead and choose a major heading there, and you'll see that the navigation tool hasn't popped up yet. If I wanted to add that, I'm going to go back to design and just turn that on under navigation. You can see it's been added to the map. I guess while we're here, I will show you that, I will show you that we have a couple of themes that we can choose from. So depending on how you want your story map to look, you might choose one of the existing ones, or you can browse your own, create your own. So you'd go through to browse themes and you can create your themes in there as well. So you can choose things like the color of your font, the color of your background, how separators and buttons will appear, the type of font that you're writing with, etc. So that's all available there, and you can actually upload school logos and whatnot too. So I'll upload one because we're here, Esri Australia logo, and you can see that that gets added to the map too. So I'm going to turn that design tool off and we're going to continue on. So I've got my major heading, different types of landscapes. I'm going to enter down again. Now I can begin just typing if I have an idea of what I want to say. And as I type, I can highlight it too and change it to what I want it to look like. I am, like we are today, I'm also going to just copy and paste. Now, the annoying thing about story maps is I can't just copy and paste this whole thing. I have to copy and paste each paragraph at a time. Characterize, that's right. So we'll just add a couple of these to the map, to the story map. And I like to keep my paragraphs quite short and sharp when I'm working with students. And I don't like the way that that's appeared. So you can see that there's some formatting, I guess, issues that come across. So because I'm not happy with that, I might actually physically write these in. So I'm gonna click on the plus button, I'm gonna click text. And before I start writing, I'm gonna choose bulleted list, and I would enter each of these as needed. Arid landscapes, mountain landscapes, and cast landscapes. And I'll delete each of these. And you can see that the formatting hasn't quite come across from Word, which is usually dot points and numbers seem to be the biggest contributors to that. So just be aware of that when you are transferring across from Word. But you can see that I've got my body text in there now. If I return, I've got one more sentence to go, and then I'm jumping into a subheading. So it really depends on how you want your students to build their story maps. I like to go through the Word document approach just so that I know what I'm doing. So every time I need to add something, I hit plus and I can copy and paste my text in so that it appears a certain way. And you can see that the subheading there, nice and distinct, but doesn't appear up in the navigation tool either. Got some more text there. I will add the first paragraph in and then we'll jump into something a little bit different. All right, so we've got that text, that introductory text to what a coastal landscape may be. And then I've made a note to myself, I actually want to add a bit of a swipe map in here. So underneath my text, hitting enter, and then I'm going back to my plus button. And really this is the follow the bouncing ball approach. It's all here. All my tools are in this plus button. So I wanted a swipe map. I'm gonna scroll down to swipe map. I'm gonna add this here. I want it a little bit bigger so I can select my sizes here, medium or large, which will hit the ends of your screens. I'm personally a big fan of medium just because it looks a little neater. It doesn't seem to interrupt the flow as much, but that again depends on what you're hoping to achieve. Because we're talking about coastal landscapes, it'd be nice to add a web map that reflects that. So I'm going to add in, been working with Mansfield recently on one of their year 10 assignments. And this is one of the maps that they've created. So this is the Gold Coast here. We might focus in around here, and I want to see how that coastal landscape has changed over time. So I've got some 1955 imagery, might even go a bit closer, and this is the spit just above Surfers Paradise. I'm going to place that in. And then I'm also on the right-hand side going to add in some change over time. So I'm clicking on that same map again because I've got all the layers in this map. I could choose from 1997, 2012, or if I turn all my layers off, this is actually 2020 satellite imagery, I believe. Maybe 2021 by now, actually. But this is the same region of the spit. So if I place that map again, once it loads in, we can see how that coastal landscape has changed over time. A really effective tool, and we're looking at, I guess, the sand in this back area of the river as it exits out to the ocean. And things like the sand pumping jetty have considerably cleaned that up over time. If you're wondering why the grey doesn't go all the way across, this is an orthomosaic, so it's, I think, 1955. It was plane photos stitched together, photos taken from a plane. They've been stitched together, and that's evidently where the image stops. We've got that swipe map in there to really drive home whatever I'm talking about in the coastal landscapes section above. Probably talking about how erosional and depositional factors can influence those landscapes. If I go back to my Word document, my next little hint is, hey, actually now I want to break the straightforward kind of approach to how I'm putting the text in, and I want to enter a map tour template. So I hit that plus button again, and I've got some templates down the bottom. You see that map tour is one of them, Sidecar, slideshow. I'm going to click on map tour, start from scratch. And what did I choose in my settings? Listed. All right, I think that's Explorer mode. Yep, list. So you can see that there's a couple of options within each particular layout or template. I can go through guided or Explorer, and then I click on that and I get some more options too. And you can change this later. That's something that I really like to point out. You're not stuck with this. This is a living, breathing document, if you will. If you decide that once you've built out your list, it would look better as a grid, you can actually edit that, and I'll show you how you can do that. So I'm going to hit next, and I essentially have to build my map tour out. This is the particular map that's being shown now because this is the theme I've chosen. If I'm not happy with this theme, that's all right. I can go to map options. I'm going to change that base map because I'm looking at landscapes, satellite imagery, or imagery with labels, which I believe is imagery hybrid, are probably the better tools for the job. I like imagery with labels just because it helps my students find where they're going. And I want to set my zoom level too. So because I'm going to be looking at coastal landscapes, sitting out here at this country's view or this country's map extent, not too useful. I'm going to go right into cities. I think I chose before. Yep, cities level. I'm going to hit done. Don't worry about the fact that it's here at Neptune Island at the moment. We can fix that in just a second when we start our actual tour. So I'm going to click on the first one. I'm going to go back. Our first one is going to be Gulf Coast NT, Northern Territory. And I'm going to copy the body text to go with it. Gulf Coast, Northern Territory, and I can add the location to the map. So I'm going to go finding it. You do have a search by location function in the top right corner to help you find your locations, because the Gulf Coast is essentially all of this, because it's the coast that essentially intersects with the Gulf of Carpentaria. That's probably not going to work too much, but I found a spot a little bit earlier, and I'm going to just click on the map, and this will be my first map tour point. I'm going to hit add location, and it brings us right into that. And if we read the text to go with it, this coastal landscape, over 20 rivers drain into the Gulf, which results in river deltas. These deltas are results of depositional processes. They transport sediment. That sediment is deposited along the coastline. and the delta system now has resulted in mangrove lined shores. So we're just unpacking that coastal landscape, and I can actually get a better image of this by going and finding one from the web. I'm not gonna look, we will, but golf, it's probably not going to be the correct image. I'll probably have to go looking, but let's pretend that this is the Gulf Coast. And I just right click on the image, copy image address, go back to my story map, hit link, enter that URL and add it. And you can see that that image is there. So it complements the map. If I wanted to flip, I guess the content, so I wanted the image to be the main focus and the map to be up in the left-hand corner, I can do that too. And that's, if we wanted to make those changes, whoops, I can go in here and I can change those layout settings and what I want to prioritize. And I can also change the size of each panel. So if I wanted the image to be a little bit larger so that my students can see it a bit clearly, or I wanted my text to be a bit more focal, I can make changes to that as well, or I can even flip sides too. Personally, I'll just love my text on the left-hand side. I think that's the way my brain works, so that's the way I usually do it. And then I simply just continue to build my map tour out. So every time I want to add a new point along the tour, I just hit the plus button in the bottom right corner, and I would go through the process again. So we'll go through one more just so you can see. This time we've got Noosa Heads, Queensland. Noosa Heads, QLD. And I add my location in. And this time, because it's a bit of a searchable place, I am gonna use the search tool. And I'm not quite happy with that map extent. I wanna show off the coastal landscape, so this might be a bit better. So I've got two, what we could discuss with our students is we have two coastal landscapes here. We've got this one along the headlands, and then a bit of a different one along this stretch of the Noosa North Shore. And I'm going to hit add location. I think we just might need to scroll back and forth. Oh, that hasn't taken off. Should have though. If we're not happy with it, we can edit that location. Let's just check. It might be use. No, I want to use the map tour settings. Hit done. I'm not sure if it's working. This is a good point actually. We can always hit the preview button in the top corner, and I can actually go and have a look and see what this is looking like. So I've got the Gulf Coast, that seems to have worked. Noosa Head isn't working, so I'm going to have to go back in and make those changes. Worked for me yesterday, so hopefully it does today, and if it doesn't, then I'll have to play with it. But these things happen. Got to experiment sometimes and try and work out what's going on. I'm not going to spend too much time. If it's not wanting to work, then I'm just going to leave it as it is, and we're going to move on today. So my map tour settings is saying that I want to work at that city level. Maybe the city level is the issue. It says that I'm currently at a neighborhood level, so that might be the better one to go with this time around. And we can see that that change has taken place. But we continue to build that map tour out. Once you're done with your map tour, it's just a matter of scrolling down and continuing with your story map, and that plus button will appear again for you to add some more content. So this time, let's change it up, and we're going to go with arid landscapes. Let's just jump from riverine to arid landscapes. I'm gonna put it in, put it in. Change my subheading again because I don't want it to appear up in my major headings. And then I'm gonna enter a sidecar this time. And this is probably my preferred template, my preferred layout. I personally don't like the floating panel because if I have an image or a map in the background, whilst I can navigate around the map, I don't want my text box covering large sections of the map. So I always like to dock the panel. That way the image or the map or whatever you're embedding will sit to the side and won't be covered by the text box. So I always flick over to the docked panel. And it's the same, it's a similar process. I'm not going to spend too much time, but I can add my text and start to build that out too. Let's see what else I've included that might be a little bit different. Okay, so a video this time. Or I might actually point out this. I've got an arid land, I'm talking about arid landscapes, but I want to highlight a rainfall and evapotranspiration map. So if I click on add, you can see that I've got a range of images, range of options this time. I can add my embeds, I can add a swipe, I can add just a basic map or an image or video. Let's go with the swipe again. It's my favorite. And from memory, oh, I won't know where it is. I know that I have a really great evapotranspiration map, but whether I can find that is another story. As you can see, I've got too many, too many maps, but you can essentially add the map that you want. I might just have to go with, we'll go with that flooding one. I just saw that, the Brisbane floods. That's that similar process. I turn on what I want to be seen at any particular time. So I don't want my floods appearing yet, so I'm going to turn that layer off. But I do want the Brisbane River, if that's an option. Oh, here it is, Brisbane River, right in front of me, to appear. Set my map extent so I'm happy with it. Place the map, and then go about adding that same one again. And turning on or off the relevant layers as needed. So I do want that one on this time. And you can see where the data ends once it's reached the mouth of the Brisbane River. That data does end. If I wanted to show a legend while we're here, I can go to settings and I can enable the legends too if I have one, or if the data has one. I don't believe that this data has a legend, or has, the symbols haven't been added to the legend. And if I have bookmarks on my map, I can also go to a predefined map extent too. And I'm going to hit place map again. I've got my nice swipe map in there, and I would build my text around what's being displayed on the right-hand side. And again, a very similar process. Every time I want to add some more information, but maybe want a different focal point as my media, I can just keep adding slides as needed. And this time, maybe I want to include some footage of the Sahara Desert, I believe. Get rid of that space, and I can add it to the map. And I guess this is where you might need to consider what your students have access to. So I think because it's embedded, you don't have any issues with a student accessing an embedded YouTube video. And I'm just speaking from my knowledge of a school's internet security settings and what they allow students to access and not. However, if you were a student building a story map at school and you wanted to include a YouTube URL, well, you're probably not going to be able to access YouTube on the school internet, so you might actually have to do that at home and embed that at home so that it comes into the story map. Just little things to consider, and then it's a matter of pressing play and that video is there for me to watch. Otherwise, we've got a little bit of a closing task that I'll add to the end of my story map for my students. So I'm chucking in closing task. This time I want to make it a heading so that it appears on the top. And I've got a bit of a research task for my students. So they're going to locate 3 Australian landscapes using ArcGIS Online, briefly research it, and identify the landforms in each landscape. So hopefully we're thinking of things like Uluru or the 12 Apostles, those sections of coastal landscapes or arid landscapes, they're unique Australian landscapes. But I want them to sign into ArcGIS Online, and if they don't know where to go, then I can actually click on that plus button again, And I can add, where is it, a button. So log into ArcGIS Online, and here's the direct link. And so when I publish this story map, they could physically click on this button and it would open up a new tab for them to go to. Whether that's a login, like ArcGIS Online, or whether that's something like a great newspaper article that you wanted to share with them, but you didn't want it embedded in your story map for whatever reason, you can send them off to that news article. I guess we don't have the time to go through all of them, but the thing to stress is that the tools are all appear on this plus button. And my biggest encouragement is to play around with what's available. Most of them are fairly self-explanatory. You can see that there's a couple in beta, so they're being developed still, but this timeline one I think is new this month. And as a history teacher, I find that it's really exciting. So I can 1346, I don't know what happened, Egypt. Let's go with Egypt. And I can add an image in which will appear above the text for each one. And so every time I want to add, I just add an event or a spacer and I can build that out. So it's again, follow the bouncing ball. You can't go wrong with it. You can experiment, and if you make a mistake, deleting is quite easy too. And I guess that's something to stress too. If you delete something, either as a teacher or as a student, because this is being saved constantly, if you decide to delete something, there's no way to get it back. It's gone. So again, that's the stress. That's why we stress having that Word document backup. So if everything goes wrong and my assessment is due the next day and I've just for some reason deleted my whole story map, I can still submit my Word document as my assessment piece and I'm all good to go. So that's a little bit of a safety there. I do have a question. I'm just going to open that up so I can read it out. I've got a couple of questions. I'll answer them now. We are getting up to the Q&A section anyway, but I'll answer these just so we can clear them. So do schools need to subscribe to ArcGIS before we have access to create our own maps? Yep, great question. Yes, you do. We'll open it up really quickly. You can access or sign up for the school's a school license, request a free ArcGIS Online account for your school. 2,000 users come with it, so you can add all your students, all your teachers. Once they have access, they can access story maps, Survey 123, ArcGIS Online, and more. Next question. I might have missed something, but how do you get the story map to show as a linear series of windows while you're designing it? Is that where we were talking about this particular one? I'm not sure exactly where you're referring to, but if you wanted a map tour that had I guess those linear images so that you can build it out, I'll just go down and create a new one. So it's going to map tour. I always start from scratch, that's just me. And instead of guided, we're going over to Explorer. And then there's that list option there, which is that, I guess, hopefully I'm interpreting your question right, but you've got your linear series of windows down the left-hand side and you build it out from there. All right, I've hit a couple of questions on the head. I'm just gonna touch on a couple more points here. Slideshow is what it is. It's very similar to PowerPoint. You know, the big, powerful image takes place, and you can add text over the top. If you don't add text, whilst this box is here, nothing will appear on your preview or on your finished result. So this box will only appear if you've populated it with text. So don't freak out if you just wanted a bit of an image gallery or library, and you just build it out the same way that you've built the others out. You can see that there's some additional tools. So if I click on that, I can make the background of that box transparent or flip the text color in there. I can change the position. And I can also change the horizontal or the vertical position there too. So again, it's just a matter of testing things out. And if I built my slideshow and went, you know what, that's not the best way to share my information, I might create that sidecar, copy all this information down in my sidecar layout, and then delete my slideshow. So I guess it's all, the power is in the button and clicking through to what you want. I will finish we'll jump over to questions. I'll just finish with this point in Story Maps. You've got your references section. So from a student perspective or from a teacher's perspective who's wanting to teach good referencing practices, you can build out your references here. You can choose to build it out on this particular thing and add to it. I personally don't, because I'm not teaching my students that that's how we set a bibliography out or a referencing list out. I would simply build my referencing list out manually, story maps, etc., and build it out with the URL, and then hit enter and add the next source. But it does have that capability there. I know that's a big point, especially if it's for assessment purposes, that we have somewhere where we can put our references. And you can see that references, as soon as I've populated it, it becomes a final navigation point on my story map too. Otherwise, we'll jump back to here and I will field a couple of questions. So got one question. I'm adding our own maps from survey 123. Is it possible to import it by category of the survey? Hopefully I'm going to understand what you're saying here as I unpack it. But I'm guessing you want to display a map with a particular question or particular result from a certain question on your story map. I hope that's right. And if that is right, I can show you one that I've actually done recently. So even though it says survey 123, I now get into the habit of presenting everything in story maps. But if what you're meaning is, can I embed my survey and then my survey results and view by question? So I've got a couple of questions here. I've embedded my survey. How many years of teaching experience do you have? Okay, so I want to view that question and the results for that question in particular in here. And I've got my survey results here. So I've actually done a little bit of work. So I've had to create a map, but you can see that these are my 5 questions that were in my survey. And I've got my how many years of teaching experience do you have? And I flick that arrow down. I've also got my legend there as well. And so you can see the results that are on my map. Now, for you to create a map, it means that you have to have some kind of mapping-based question there. So if I didn't ask a question that asks for them to put in a location, then I'm not going to be able to display my results on a map. It needs a geotagged response somewhere. So that was what international city will be your first visit once we can travel again. You can see those points pop up around the map. And as I turn them on, those points are staying the same, but the colors are changing because I've symbolized it according to each question. Hopefully that answers your question. Carolyn, you're asking where are the templates? So again, I'm just going to keep opening a new story maps. If I want to find a particular template to work with, perhaps I wanted the map tool or the slideshow one, all I have to do is hit the plus button, the plus button, and it's just under immersive, that heading immersive. So I've got my slideshow, my sidecar, or my map tour templates. And if I don't choose any of them, then this is how my my story map will appear, just that kind of middle of the line text. Do we have to create the map layers that we want to insert into the story map, or are there ready layers? So yes, I've created all of my maps ahead of time. So this is a map that sits in ArcGIS Online that I've created that has imagery layers of the Gold Coast over several years. If I wanted to create a really basic map, this is a really good question actually. I'm glad you asked it. If I wanted to create a really basic map but didn't have the time or didn't really need to go in and build that really detailed map, I have an option to create what we call an express map. So I've hit add map and new express map in the top right corner. And it gives you, I'm not going to go through this, but it gives you some instructions on how to build your express map. So if I wanted to focus in on Australia, I wanted to change that base map again, so I can go to settings, change the base map as I see fit. And you can see that I've got some extra tools here, so I could add a search function into the map for my students. But I can also build out a really quick map with some feature layers on the spot. So I've got my point icon, and I can add that to the map. And I can add a name. Let's say that this is approximately Brisbane, a description, some basic style settings. For instance, I might have it as an image instead. And I hit done, and that's locked in as a feature layer on my map. Now I can build lines and polygon data as well. And I can also add text to my map to Brisbane, and some extra settings there too. If I want that background to disappear, there's those settings there. So a really nice little tool here. Express maps, draw an arrow. I'm pretty sure that we can actually bend this arrow too. So some really cool little functions there that don't take that. If it's a really casual map, might be the best way to go about it is to edit or create an express map. I'm going to discard that for now. Next question. How do you share your story maps with students? Fantastic question. So once I've done building my story map, all I got to do is hit publish and set my share level. If my students don't have an ArcGIS account, I don't want to choose private or my organization, because my organization will prompt them to log in with their credentials, their ArcGIS credentials, to view the story. I always just choose everyone. I publish the story, it checks the story for issues. I don't think I've ever created a story map that's come back with some issues, which is again a good thing. It pretty much runs itself. It publishes your story. Nice work, well done, pats on the back. And then there's this third symbol up the top here, so next to your Facebook and Twitter. If I click on this, it's copy the story map URL. You've copied the story map URL. Essentially, you can paste it to an email or a Word document that they might be working from, or you can just write it up on the board, and there's the URL for that story map. So I've just pasted it into a new window. So that's how you share with your students. How do I add navigation? So to repeat that step really quickly. So to add that navigation bar across the top of my story maps, it'll appear after my main image, my main cover image. But that navigation toolbar, I'm just hitting design, and I am enabling the navigation button there. How do I access the app for creating story maps? No worries, we're nearly through them, and then I'll touch on some more things really quickly. I know that we're getting close to 4:30, but these are great questions, and I'll just touch on some things to consider moving forward before you do leave. If you got to run, that's fine. So to get to story maps, if you have ArcGIS Online, log into ArcGIS Online, and then this right next to your username, this little widget bar, you click on it, and you've got all the apps available to you. You'll see that Story Maps is one of those applications, and it will just open a new window for you and take you there. Can you start a story map and then students work on it or complete it? That's a great question. That is a function that I believe is coming, but is not here yet. So if you had students working on components, I know that this is something that OneNote does, I believe. It might be that you get them to use OneNote or Word document to build their piece out, and then they contribute that to you in an email or something like that. Unfortunately, that functionality is just not there yet, but I do believe it's coming. Can students work together on a story map on separate devices? I think that probably has been answered in the question prior, the answer I just provided. Could you let me know of any teachers that are currently using story maps? Kieran, there are plenty of teachers using story maps. If you wanted some practical examples, feel free to just reach out to me directly, and I will shoot you in the direction of a couple. I'm just very aware of, there's a lot of people on here, and maybe not everyone is in need of that. So I'm just a bit hesitant to put a teacher's name in here and throw them under the bus, and the next moment they wake up tomorrow and have 100 emails from teachers here. So yeah, just feel free to reach out to me. I guess in finishing, a couple of things that I wanted to touch on. Tips for getting started with story maps. Sometimes, I guess it's the old saying, if the wheel already exists, like, don't go and reinvent it. There are a bunch of wonderful story maps that exist. Plenty on our Esri Australia schools page, and I'll show you a couple of other places you can go to find them in just a minute's time. But identify key opportunities or topics in your units to build story maps for or around. We could build a story map for every lesson, but maybe there are some lessons that really lend themselves to that immersive experience, these interactive maps that you might want to include. And my encouragement would be to look for those key opportunities and do those key opportunities well before maybe just starting at the start of your unit of work and attempting to build a story map for each one. It's better to do one really well that's going to add some real value. You can build story map collections. So if you are building story maps for a particular unit of work, you can house all of those story maps in a particular collection so that your students know that, hey, we're looking at land cover transformations over time. I've built a little land cover transformation collection, and it has 5 story maps within it, and you just access them in order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. As we touched on, it doesn't have to include maps, and there are several how-to guides or tips that I've included as a link for you to visit that Esri has published. Otherwise, there are actually a couple of places you can go to access existing story maps, and I've included those links here. Our Schools Learning page, the Esri Story Maps collection, and the Classic Story Maps collection. So this is the new story maps, but the Classic Story Maps is still up and running, and any story map that was created prior to 2020, well, not any, but a gallery of older story maps are also available. And I've just included a couple here. So here's a story map embedded in a story map, a bit of inception for you, but something like hot numbers displays. This was created by Esri's story map team and goes through climate change with some really powerful numbers and images there to unpack it. So if you are wanting to access this presentation so that you can access some of those additional resources, this is the URL that you want to copy down. Otherwise, my details are here again, and I've had a couple more come through with questions. So how do we access this video in the future? A really good question. So there's the URL for this story map presentation itself, but if you want an access to the recording, there's 2 ways to go about it. By registering and being a part of the webinar today, you'll receive a post-webinar email in a couple of days when the digital team does some slight editing to my presentation, and that email will contain a recording. Otherwise, on our school's website, under the Professional Development tab, you will see that there's a range of resources, one of them being story maps that I've created, but also if we keep scrolling down, we have our past webinars section, and it will appear in this past webinar section in a couple of days for you to access. My school has a high security with student data. Who do I contact to check where the data is stored? You can contact me for that, and I can provide you the information that your IT team might need in response to that question. And last question, our institution has ArcGIS Online. Is there a way to bulk add students to ArcGIS Online, or can I establish a free school account? So I'm going to assume that the school has a free school account already. as you've mentioned that your institution has an ArcGIS Online account. And if that's the case, how do you go about adding bulk students? My encouragement would be to visit that adding teachers and students section on the PD page. And I've actually got a template, a spreadsheet template where you can add, let's say, a class at a time. And it takes you, and I've got the video or the guide to go through that process with you. So that's there as well. Otherwise, one last time, there's the URL for the presentation. Otherwise, it will be in the recording. And I want to just say thank you for taking some time out of your busy day. I think it's week 6 or 7, I believe, of the school term. So I know that it's starting to ramp up with reporting, drafting, marking, exams, and whatnot. So again, thank you for your time. I hope that you've gotten something out of it, and keep an eye out for some future webinars coming your way. Thanks, guys. See you later.